Hey, good morning, everyone. Hey, can we give it everything we got this morning? Come on, let's stand and sing together. From urban streets to open plains, we are under one name. No one is lost or goes unseen, 'cause we're all loved by our King. Come on! This is nothing ordinary. There is power in the name we carry. Every nation, every tongue. Welcome to the kingdom. Come on! All the rich, all the poor, all the people are yours. We are daughters, we are sons, more than mortals, we are royal. We are yours, we are yours, yeah, yours, we are yours. Our hearts unbound, we're running free in different stories for one dream. We don't wonder, but we belong. We found our home in the Father's love. This is nothing ordinary. There is power in the name we carry. Every nation, every tongue. Welcome to the kingdom. All the rich, all the poor, all the people are yours. We are daughters, we are sons, more than mortals, we are royals. We are yours, we are yours, yeah, yours, we are yours. It don't matter where we come from. Everyone is welcome in the kingdom. It don't matter if we're broke or we're broken. In your love we found our freedom. That's the truth this morning. Come on. Hey. Yeah. All the rich, all the poor, all the people are yours. We are daughters, we are sons, more than mortals, we are royals. We are yours, we are yours, yours, we are yours,
Hello. Hello, good morning. Welcome to Mission. How is everyone today? Yes, we're doing so good. Hey, I'm Rachel. We're so glad that you all are here with us today. If it happens to be your first time here, or maybe your second or third time, but you would just call yourself new, be sure to stop by the Hub. It's just out those doors in the lobby. We just would genuinely love to meet you, connect with you, answer any questions that you have, and we have a gift for you as well. We're excited to meet you there. Speaking of being excited, you guys, Easter Sunday is in 2 weeks. Yeah, we are pumped for it. We can't wait. Be sure to RSVP online. Let us know what service you're coming to. We have 4 services for you to choose from, 3 on our normal service times on Sunday, and then we have added a service on Saturday at 4:30. And for those of you who are making the switch to Saturday, we have some really fun things planned. We've got inflatables, food trucks, some special activities. It's going to be a great time. And I just want to encourage all of you, this is a great time to be inviting. And we've made that really easy for you all. As you leave today, grab some of these cards on the way out. Grab a handful. Hand them to your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends, and family. I'm going to give some to my kids and have them hand them out at school, and that'll be fun. So go crazy. Invite everybody. We're really excited for that. Now, Paul and Kelly and the band are going to sing a few more songs with us, and Joel's going to come out and continue the David series. But first, say hello to the people around you and tell them who you are inviting to Easter.
cross is my beginning, the line drawn in the sand, the end of all my striving. Now I am born again. There Jesus was forsaken, so I will never be. His grace is my salvation, the gift of God, the work of Calvary. It is done, it is finished. Christ has won, He is risen, grace is here, love has triumphed over death forever. Yeah. The cross needs no addition, no, no. His mercy is complete, His love is not in question. The Son of God has spoken over me. It is done, it is finished. Christ has won, He is risen, grace is here, love has triumphed over death forever. He's triumphed, yeah. Strongholds bowing to the Savior, resurrection power over every circumstance. His word stands final and forever. It will not be shaken. He alone has won it all. Strongholds bowing to the Savior, resurrection power over every circumstance. His word stands final and forever. It will not be shaken. He alone has won it all. It is done, it is finished. Christ has won, He is risen, grace is here, love has triumphed over death forever. It is done, it is finished. Mercy won, God forgiven. Sing His name, He is worthy of all praise. Jesus, yeah. He's worthy, He's worthy,
Alone in my sorrow and dead in my sin, lost without hope with no place to begin. Your love made a way to let mercy come in. When death was arrested and my life began, and ash was redeemed, only beauty remains. And my orphan heart was given a name. My morning grew quiet, my feet rose to dance. When death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new now. Life begins with you. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. My shame was a ransom he faithfully bore. For he canceled my debt and he called me his friend. Oh, when death was arrested, my life began. Oh, your grace so washes over me. You have made me new now. Life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new now. Life begins with you. Our Savior displayed on a criminal's cross, and darkness rejoices though heaven had lost. But then Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. That's when death was arrested and my life began. That's when death was arrested and my life began. Oh, your grace so free washes over me. You have made me new now. Life begins with you. It's your endless love pouring down on us. You have made us new now. Life begins with you. Oh, we're free, free, ever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, ever, amen. When death was arrested, my life began. Oh, we're free, free, ever we're free. Come join the song of all the redeemed. Yes, we're free, free, ever, amen. When death was arrested, my life began. When death was arrested, my life began. That's when death was arrested, my life began. Oh, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. He set us free. Love of our God. And he loves us. Oh, how Yeah, he loves us. You and me, yeah, he loves us. Oh, yeah, he loves us. Oh, he loves us. He loves us. Oh, how he loves. God, we thank you. And we come to you this morning needing to hear that. In fact, someone in this room, I believe, hearing those words that you love us is going to save their life today. It's going to give them a future. It's going to give them a hope. It's going to give them a freedom they've never experienced before, God. And I just pray your love would overwhelm them. A love from a father who never gave up on them, who never ran away from them, never doubted them, never asked them to be better. Just this unconditional love, God. May it surround us and give us hope. Remind us of the freedom that we have in you, our loving Father in heaven. We praise you, God. We thank you. It's your name I pray. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for singing with us this morning. Y'all can have a seat. We're going to continue to worship, celebrate this morning by giving back to that loving Father that we have in heaven, by receiving an offering. And so I'm going to invite our volunteers up as we receive our tithes and offerings this morning.
Well, I'm thrilled to be back and jumping back into this series. It's been fantastic. Before we do that, I just want to emphasize something Rachel said. We are absolutely thrilled, gearing up towards and sort of crescendoing towards Easter. And if you've never been with us here on Easter, Easter's a big deal. And in fact, we've been planning for weeks and months for Easter because in the church, Easter's like, some of you heard me say this before, it's like the Super Bowl. I know that sounds weird, but like, it's the Super Bowl of church. And so it's like the weekend to celebrate. And just to give you a little bit of a preview, preview. In fact, I'm so ready, like I'm ready to preach the sermon already. In fact, we could just skip the rest of the David series. I could go to Easter right now if I needed to. I'm so excited about it. But our theme for the day, just a preview, is No Better Day. Because there's no better day. There's no better day to celebrate. There's no better day to worship. There's no better day to come to church. There's no better day to invite somebody. There's no better day in history than Easter Sunday. And that's what we're going to celebrate. We're going to talk about why there's no better day to any of us in life. And you probably had some really great days, but there is literally no better day than the original Easter story, and we're going to celebrate that, and we're going to talk about why that's so significant. But the reason I bring that up is because we're also doing something unique this year. We haven't done, at least in several years on Easter, is we're doing baptisms on Easter this year. We have several people signed up for baptism already, which is exciting. But I know there's some of you that have been wanting to get baptized, or you know you should, or you've sort of wanted to kind of take that step and go public in your faith. And Easter, I'll just say this, there's no better day than Easter to get baptized. In fact, what baptism symbolizes is what happened on Easter. And so if you're interested in doing that, we actually, during this service next week, during the 10:30 service, we're actually having a meeting for people who want to get baptized on Easter. If you haven't even taken a step in the process, next week, we'll catch you up. You'll find out everything you need to know. And you can just show up at that meeting, show up here and ask somebody, and they'll point you in the right direction. Or on your way out today, you can stop by the hub and ask somebody about getting signed up for that class next week. It happens just during the service time next week. So please take that step. We would love to celebrate with you on Easter, and as many people that want to get baptized, we're going to figure it out, and we're going to celebrate baptism during our Easter services. If you haven't been with us in the David series, it's been incredibly fun. There's so much incredible narrative, but the reason we decided to camp out on the life of David for several weeks is because second only to Jesus, we have more mentions and more detailed accounts of the life of David than we have anybody else in the scriptures. And I don't think that's by accident. There's so much to learn. In fact, we're going to spend 7 weeks there, but we could spend 70 weeks on David. We're spending these 7 weeks, so unpacking some of the familiar and unfamiliar stories of David. And if you weren't here last week, I'll just say Kenny's message was so powerful. It was so challenging. He talked about greatness. And we've been following the life of the story of David, not quite chronologically, but a lot before he became king. And last week, Kenny camped on the idea of what made David great. And it's a greatness that anybody can achieve. If you missed that, you definitely want to go back and check it out. It was so powerful and challenging. But today, we're going to sort of move into David's years of reign as the king. And an important thing happened. David had been trying to elude Saul for a really long time. He'd sort of been on the run. And Saul had been trying to kill him because he was threatened and he was insecure. And he knew that God had sort of moved on from him and had chosen David to be the next king. And he didn't want the throne to leave his family, so he's trying to kill David. David's trying to elude him. But in battle, as God would have it, and it just shows that God always finds a way, even when we think there's not really a way for something to work out. Saul and his 3 sons are killed in battle. And that's important because there wasn't really anybody to take over the throne from Saul. There was no possibility of the kingdom being divided and people going, no, where was Saul? Everybody at once, when that happened, was sort of on Team David. It was sort of unanimous. He's the next leader. He was not only the warrior hero, they sort of knew that God had chosen him to be the next king. So there was sort of no problems. And this began David's rise to power and success. As a matter of fact, the first 5 years he was the leader of the nation, he successfully went and collected and brought back all of the Israelite territory that had been stolen by other kingdoms, primarily the Philistines, but several different people. He was able to bring back all of the Israelite territory, unite their kingdom. And David, in his first 10 years, that was his first 5 years, in his first 10 years, he grew to such success in his rule as a ruler that he was sort of now leading the greatest empire on earth at this time. And everybody feared the Israelites. And David's success led Israel to a season of peace and power and prosperity. And they were in a season unlike they had ever been before. And this is sort of what they had hoped for. If you remember back to one of the earlier weeks, we talked about the fact that the people wanted a king even when God didn't really want them to have a king because he wanted to be their king. They wanted a physical king, and what they had hoped for was somebody that would lead them to peace and prosperity and power. And it wasn't their choice, it was God's choice. When God chose David, he chose to bless David, give David success, and Israel sort of found itself in a situation where it's exactly where they wanted to be. But as you know, and some of you know this all too well because you've experienced success, success doesn't come without new challenges and new problems. They just traded their old challenges and their old problems for new ones. And if you have a Bible with you, we're gonna look at a very familiar story today. And there's both personal and organizational or personal and national challenges that come with success. But today we're gonna look at a little more on the personal side. If you have a Bible, I'd love for you to turn to 1 Samuel or in your device, 1 Samuel chapter 11. We're gonna read through a lot of narrative today as we have in the past. We're gonna actually cover chapter 11 and 12. And it's a very familiar story, and we're gonna look at it maybe in a little bit of a different way. But before we jump into that, as you're turning there, I just wanna make a couple of observations about success. While it's something we all love and we're all pursuing, and you're trying to have success in different areas of your life, whether it's in business or in family or in relationships, the truth is success can be blinding. Success is often blinding. And when we're focused oftentimes on the things we've done versus where we're headed and things that are ahead of us, we have a tendency to always be looking in the rearview mirror at our past success rather than the future threats that are ahead of us and things that might be on the horizon. And oftentimes we can get overinflated about our view of self and the success that we've experienced. And oftentimes that success becomes overshadowing and it becomes blinding in our lives. And we do and say things and we view ourselves in ways we never did before. And the truth is you know this, some of you experienced this. You know somebody that became really successful. And when they became successful in some area of life, and this is true of most people, that when you become successful somewhere, you become an expert or you think you're smarter everywhere. Like, isn't that true? Like somebody gets really successful or they make a lot of money and all of a sudden they're an expert on everything. It's like because they've been successful. I just want to clarify something. And some of you have heard me say this before, that I think this is worth repeating. It's not in the Bible. So this is my opinion. But as I look around, here's what I believe. Mo Benjamins does not equal Mo Brains. It just doesn't. And you know this, just if you don't believe me, just turn on TMZ or pick your show or your channel, and you'll see lots of people that have lots of money who are making really dumb decisions. And you're like, what do they do? They should be smarter than that. Look at all the money they have. Look at all the means. And the truth is these two things, there's no relationship between these two things. And so just because you become successful doesn't mean you're smarter or you're wiser. In fact, oftentimes it actually clouds your judgment because success is intoxicating. It's blinding, but it's also intoxicating. It impairs our judgment. It makes us do things we would never do before. I have a really good friend who used to be a much better friend. And his success in life has dramatically impaired his judgment. I mean, he does things, he says things, he acts in a way, he spends money in a way, he relates to people. He sort of, lives his life and operates in a way that he never would have before. In fact, he would have judged himself previously for the things that he's doing now, and he doesn't see it. He's completely unaware because his judgment is impaired because success is both blinding and intoxicating. But maybe the most challenging and the most dangerous thing about success is not just that it's blinding and intoxicating, it's that it's isolating. Some of you have experienced this. You know somebody, or maybe you, as you become more and more successful, there's this fear that comes with that, and you feel like you have to be less accessible to people, especially if you've sort of risen up the ladder in a corporation, especially if you've moved all the way to the top of the heap and you're sort of the CEO. It's why they say, that it's lonely at the top. And the truth is the more success you have in some category, the fewer peers you have in that category, or the fewer peers you have in life in general. And you sort of think people can't relate to you, and you sort of experiencing something that nobody else is experiencing. And the thing is, there's a lot of times people want something from you. They want your time, they want your resources, they want you to help them with something, they want you to give towards something, they want you to be a part of something, they want to borrow on your success. And so for necessary reasons, you've sort of become less accessible, but that becomes incredibly dangerous. You're gonna see that in a minute in David's life. But even if you're somebody who's going, I'm not a CEO, I don't run my own company, I'm not like this extraordinary successful person in my industry, any level of success has the potential to be blinding. We think we know better. It can be intoxicating. I need more, and there's no end to that. And it can be isolating as we deal with fear and we sort of try to isolate ourselves from things that might take away the success that we've experienced. 1 Samuel chapter 11, starting in verse 1, this is how it begins. In the spring of the year, the literal translation of the Hebrew language, the original language is, at the turn of the year. That's important because a new year's beginning. At the turn of the year or in the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab, who's one of his trusted advisors and top military leaders, sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. When kings normally would go, David sent Joab and the Israelite army out to fight the Ammonites. This is sort of the new year, new challenge. We're gonna accomplish more than we did last year, and we're gonna conquer. And some of us, we experience the same thing. When a new year's there, whether it's personal or business, you set new goals, and we're gonna go out and accomplish new things. And they destroyed the Ammonite army, and they laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. I'm gonna take some notes as I have in some previous weeks, but this is just the beginning of the story. And the reason we're gonna take some notes is because there's a lot of narrative here, and I don't want us to lose sight, but this just begins with a bit of abnormal behavior by David. See, when the kings would normally go with their men out to war, David, for some reason, maybe because he needed a new challenge, maybe because this is, it's not fun anymore. I've already conquered everything. I'm gonna let somebody else do my job. And I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna send, even though the king would normally go, I'm gonna stay behind in Jerusalem and I'm gonna hang out. And this was not normal behavior for David. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace, which is the cue for most of us as to the story we're gonna be diving into today. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told, this is important, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. David, I know who you're inquiring about. We've been around, we know why you're inquiring about her. You just need to know this woman, Bathsheba, she's somebody's daughter, and she's somebody's wife. Then David, even knowing that information, sent messengers to get her. And when she came to the palace, he slept with her. Now, what were the messengers thinking? Why did they go? Why didn't they say something? Why didn't they speak up? You see, it's sort of a situation where they didn't know what to say, and they didn't know if they could say anything because David's the king. And isn't the king entitled to whatever the king wants? The truth is all of the men that would have normally opposed David or questioned David or cautioned David, they're off at war where David should have been or David normally would have been. And there's nobody to ask or to call into question what David's doing. The messengers are simply that. They're just messengers. The palace guards aren't there to be advisors. They're there to protect the king. And he is, after all, the king. And what the king says goes. And what the king does, the king's entitled to do. Later, when Bathsheba discovered that she was pregnant, she sent David a message saying that she was pregnant. And then David did what powerful and successful people do, and you've seen this many times before. You've seen this in the media, you've seen this in the news. David begins to leverage his power to mitigate the circumstances, to control the circumstances, and to sort of lessen or mitigate the consequences of the situation. Some of you know the story. Then David sent word to Joab after finding out that Bathsheba was pregnant. Send me Uriah the Hittite, her husband. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah arrives, David asked him how Joab and the army were getting along and how the war was progressing. So this is just small talk at the beginning. It's like Uriah doesn't know why he's being summoned. Joab doesn't know why he's being summoned. It's like, hey, just how's it going? I'm not out there. I'm usually out there. How are things going? Let's start with some small talk because they don't know what's going on behind the scenes, even though we do. Then he told Uriah, look, go home and relax. David even sent a gift to Uriah after he had left the palace, but Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. When David heard that Uriah had not gone home, he summoned him and he asked him, he said, hey, what's the matter? Why didn't you go home last night after being away for so long? Is there a problem? Uriah replied, the ark of the armies of Israel, the ark that represents the presence of God, God with his people, the ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living in tents out on the battlefield. And Joab and my master, you, David, my master's men are camping in the open fields. How could I, David, how could I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear I would never do such a thing. And you would think this is the moment. This is the wake-up moment for David. It's like, I'm not only staying home whining and dining while the ark, God's presence, and God's army, and my men and my armies out in the fields, and they're camped. I'm not only home whining and dining. I'm not just sleeping with my wife. I'm sleeping with somebody else's wife. It's like, I need to wake up. What in the world is going on? And you think this is the moment when David sees it. But if you know the story, that's not what happens. The reality is David decides he's going to double down. Because David is completely unaware of his own actions, of the consequences of them, of the nature in which he's headed in the direction of his life and the direction of his decisions. And his abnormal behavior, his entitled behavior, is now something he can't even see. His success and his own choices have blinded him. And he's been intoxicated with his success. So David decides he just is going to have to double down on his plan. The writer goes on to tell us that David instructs him, just stay here today. Just stay another day, and tomorrow you can return to the army. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited him to dinner, and he got him drunk. But even then, he couldn't get Uriah to go home to his wife. Again, he slept at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. So the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, and he gave it to Uriah to deliver. Imagine. The letter instructed Joab, station Uriah out on the front lines where the battle is fiercest, then pull back and he will be killed. Now just imagine you're Joab, and you get the letter. David's letters come to you. It's sealed with the king's seal. It's not been opened because Uriah is a faithful, loyal servant. He's going to bring it. And for unbeknownst to Uriah and little known to anyone else, Uriah is carrying his own death sentence to Joab. Imagine Joab when you open the letter and Uriah is standing in front of you, and it's like, oh my goodness, like you have no idea. I don't know what I'm supposed to do in this moment. And you would think Joab would go, okay, hold on a second. I need to at least ask David for some more information. I need to say, David, are you sure you want to do this? Do you know that Uriah he's faithful, he's a loyal servant? I mean, could you at least explain to me the nature of your decision? What we discover is that Joab doesn't do that. He doesn't question or caution. Joab does exactly what David's instructed him to do. And Uriah is put on the front lines, and they move into a dangerous area, and they back out, and they leave Uriah and some other men behind. And Uriah is struck, and he's killed. And then the writer gives us a detail that I think removes all question about the nature of what's happening in this story. He says, when Uriah's wife, not Bathsheba, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. This wasn't two stupid young people in love doing things they shouldn't be doing. This wasn't a woman enamored by a king who wanted something from him or needed to get something from him or saw a better path in life, or two people that were sort of conspiring together. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. And when the period of mourning was over, David sent for her, and he brought her to the palace, and she became one of his wives. She didn't go running to him. David summoned her and brought her to himself. This is important. This isn't consensual. This is an abuse of power. This is a circumstance where David is leveraging his power to get what he wants to get. This is about somebody who's doing things in an unusual way because he feels entitled, and he's unaware of what he's doing. And not only is he unaware, he's completely unaccountable to anybody around him. David is unaccountable for anything he's doing and anything he's saying, which is a really dangerous place to be in life. But it seems like he's gotten away with it, right? I mean, David sort of mitigated the circumstances. Uriah's out of the way, and now he's taken Bathsheba, his wife. There may be some people that put the dates together and go, wow, that seems a little interesting. You know, that baby came quick. Who knows? Who knows how that works? I mean, we all sort of kind of wonder. But here's what's clear. And I don't know how you've heard the story before, but what's clear is this isn't two people sort of conspiring together and to get Uriah out of the way. This is somebody who's isolated himself and is making decisions in whatever way he wants to. And the truth is the consequences were significant. The consequences in his future, in his family, would be tremendously significant. The baby would die. There would be all sorts of challenges in their family. God would redeem the situation. But the truth is David's greatest failure would be documented and cemented in history. Now, aren't you glad somebody's not documenting your entire life and your mistakes and your failures and your shortcomings? I mean, here we are thousands of years later reading about, people talking about, and people have for thousands of years, somebody's greatest mistake and failure. It's documented for the world to know, and I would say it's also documented for the world to learn from. You see, while success, and it is blinding and intoxicating and isolating, failure has its challenges as well. And some of you have been sitting here going, well, I'm not wildly successful. In fact, I think I'm sort of in a difficult season, and I wouldn't say I'm really winning. I'm probably losing in more areas than I'm winning. But here's what you need to know. Failure has its challenges too. Isn't it true? For David, this is true. Failure is humiliating, especially when you feel like you should be competent or you should be succeeding in a certain area. It's painful to ask for help when you're struggling in a certain area, especially if it's an area you should have competency. Whether it's in being a leader or being a dad or being a mom or being a husband or being a wife. I mean, asking for help when you know you're failing is humiliating because you feel like you should know. You feel like that's admitting defeat. Failure is not only humiliating, failure is disorienting. It causes us to in the same way that success is intoxicating, failure becomes disorienting, and the truth is that it causes us to make decisions based on emotion or out of desperation, which is the place David got to. Once he had made a mistake, once David had failed, out of desperation, David starts to compound the consequences of his failure and compound his failure in general. But it's because, like success, failure is also isolating. We want to hide. We don't want others to know what we've done. We don't want other people to know the mistakes we've made. We fear the consequences. We fear the impact if they find out, if she finds out, if he finds out, if the group, if the family, if the boss finds out. We worry about the consequences, and failure often is isolating, just like success is. See, David was isolated in his success and in his failure. And that's because both success and failure can lead to isolation in our lives. And so regardless of which end of the spectrum you're on, the real big challenge here is, how do you avoid that? How do you avoid moving through these stages of moving from abnormal to entitled to being unaware to being completely unaccountable, and now you found yourself in a situation where you're gonna make the biggest mistake of your life because there's nobody around that's gonna save you from it because you haven't positioned anyone to. Now, I know there's at least a few of you who are going, I'm not isolated. I mean, I have lots of friends. I have lots of relationships. I have lots of people around me. There's lots of people in my life. But here's what you need to know. Isolation is not, when I talk about isolation, it's not about being an introvert. It's not that you're an introvert and you don't have friends and you can't be social, because some of you are going to dismiss this and go, you know what, I'm the person that leads all the social activities. I bring the family together. I have lots of friends. We do after work get-togethers. I grab coffee with the guys from time to time. I mean, you're going to be tempted. You're going to go, I have lots of relationships, a lot of friends. I'm not an introvert. But isolation doesn't have anything to do with being an introvert. Isolation has to do with being inaccessible. The truth is it's not because you don't have friends and because you're a loner. It's the fact that you're inaccessible, or some area of your life is inaccessible to people in your life. That's what leads to isolation. David wasn't alone. David had people. You think you have people, you think you have a posse, you think you have your crew. David had lots of people. He had lots of people following him, lots of people around him. He wasn't alone. He was inaccessible. The problem is no one had the right. No one had permission. No one had authority. No one had access to David to caution him or to question him when he needed to be cautioned and he needed to be questioned. Here's something that's true, and maybe you ought to write this down, because some of you know somebody like this, and some of you, like me, you've been tempted to be in this situation in your own life. People who can't be questioned often end up doing questionable things. People who can't be questioned end up doing questionable things if they aren't doing questionable things already. So let me ask you, who has access to your life? I know you care about your life. Who has access? Who has access to your marriage? Who has access to your finances? Who has access to your social media accounts? The passwords, literally. Who can get in and see what's going on behind the scenes in the private conversation? Who has access to your thought life? Who has access to your leadership decisions? My guess is there's at least a few people in here that you're experiencing some level of success in your life. And the more successful you are, you need to know this, the more successful you are, the tendency is to be less accessible to other people. To guard your success, to guard your world, and to not let anybody see what's going on because you know you have some faults, you know you've made some questionable decisions, and you're worried about losing your success, and so you become less accessible to people. Now there's some, I'll just say that some of this is necessary. You have to be careful about the number of people you can be accessible to, the number of relationships that you're having, but that's not what we're talking about. The question is, are you willing to give people who don't owe you anything, who don't need anything from you, who don't work from you, are you willing to give those people access to you? Are you willing to give somebody like that authority over you? And what usually we fear is the vulnerability of people giving people access in our lives. We're worried that being more accessible is more vulnerable, but the truth is that's a myth. Being more accessible actually makes you less vulnerable. Here's how. While it takes some level of vulnerability in a relationship to sort of kind of pull back the curtain and let somebody know what's going on, here's what you need to know. The reason it's a myth is because vulnerability is not an option, it's a choice. You get a choice as to what you're gonna be vulnerable to. And you'll either be vulnerable to someone you know, or you'll be vulnerable to something unknown that lurks on the horizon. You'll be vulnerable to someone you know and trust, or you'll be vulnerable to something on the horizon because you don't have anybody who can warn you that danger's coming. Vulnerability and being known by somebody, fully known in life, is far less scary than vulnerability to the unknown. Just take it from David. David paid dearly where no man and no woman controls outcomes in his future and in his family. David permanently undermined his credibility and his moral authority. If you don't know the rest of the story, you should read it. I dare you. It's an absolute disaster. David goes to war with one of his sons. His children are undisciplined. There's all sorts of problems. We get the bright spot of Solomon, who's his son. It's sort of the redemption story to the Bathsheba thing. But the reality is this is the beginning of the end in David's family. And even though God's promise would bring redemption one day through Christ, the reality is that David's family situation became a debacle. And here's what you need to know, and some of you know this. When you lose the respect of your children, when you lose the honor of your children, when you lose the trust of your children, once it's gone, it's nearly impossible to get it back. When you betray their trust and you betray their confidence in you and you erode your moral authority, it's way harder to build that back up once it's lost than it is to maintain it once you have it. See, you could think that it's over for David, but there was a glimmer of hope for David. And I'll just say this, if you're here today and you're on the other side and you feel like you're in the midst of the debacle and you've already made the biggest failure and you've already made the mess, I hope you come back next week, because next week we're gonna talk about how God wasn't done with David. And he wanted to redeem it. I'll just say, I would have been done with David. When God sort of spoke and said he was really displeased with what David was going on, I would have been done with David. But the Lord, we find out in chapter 12, the beginning of chapter 12, that the Lord sent Nathan to David. Even though David wasn't willing to surround himself, God sent David somebody who he knew David would trust. In fact, God sent the only person he knew could get close to the king. Because the last time Nathan had come to David, he brought some really valuable information. He brought some very useful information to David, and David knew that Nathan was for him. So the Lord sent Nathan, the prophet, to David. He sent the prophet Nathan to David, and he sent him to tell this story. And I want to conclude with this. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he had bought. He raised that little lamb, and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like it was his baby daughter. It was part of the family. One day, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it, and he prepared it for his guest. And when David heard this, David was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole and for having no pity. This further underscores the blinding, intoxicating, and isolating nature of David's success. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. You are that man. You don't see it. It started with just some abnormal behavior, but then it moved to entitlement. You didn't think you had to play by the same rules as everybody else. You thought you deserved certain benefits and perks that other people didn't because of where you sat and what your seat was and what your power and prestige was. You became unaware of your actions and how they were impacting other people. You were blind to your own failure. And you had moved yourself into a place of complete and utter unaccountability. David, you are that man. The Lord, the God of Israel, this is what he says. He says, I anointed you king of Israel, and I saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdom of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. David, I've given you everything you've ever wanted, and I would have even given you more than that. Why then? Why? Why have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? And the truth is we know why. We know why, and the reason David did it was because David was isolated and David was inaccessible. This wasn't a heart issue. Remember, David was chosen because he was the man after God's own heart. God chose him because of that. God spoke those words about him. Let me ask you a question. If David, the man after God's own heart, wasn't immune to the blinding, intoxicating, isolating effects of success, why are you? Why am I? Why could this not happen to any single one of us? Imagine if David had empowered Nathan or someone else at the start when he was acting weird, you know? Some of you have those people in your life, they're like, what are you doing? That's weird. That's not how you normally act. That's not how you normally talk. That's not who you normally hang out with. That's not your normal pattern of behavior. What are you doing? Stop that. Like that's just weird. That's not normal. Don't do that. I mean, imagine if that's where it had stopped for David. Imagine all of the consequences and failure and difficulty that David would have missed out on. Imagine if when he sort of started to become entitled, there was somebody around him and said, okay, wait, hold on a second, David. Is this really the way you want to lead? Is this really the example you want to set? David, is this really the way you want to operate after all that God has done for you? Are you really entitled? Or have you been given your success? Imagine if David had somebody before he was completely unaware and had positioned himself in a place where he was completely unaccountable, isolated, and inaccessible by anybody else in his life. Imagine what David could have missed out on. Let me ask you this, and I'll just close with this. It's a simple question. Who's your Nathan? Like right now, is there a name that comes to mind that you go, no, there's somebody who has access in my life? They have access to me. They have access to what's going on in my world. They have access to areas where I've made mistakes in the past. No, I have somebody that can caution and somebody who can question me, somebody who can help keep me safe. Who's your Nathan? It's probably, if you don't have one, it's probably that person you don't want to give access to your life because you know what they're going to tell you. You know what they're going to call you out on. You know what they're going to caution and question you about. It might be that person that was nominated to come talk to you because everyone else around you or everybody in your family was afraid to, or they were afraid you wouldn't listen to them. So they all nominated someone to come towards you, and you felt threatened and you felt offended and you felt attacked, and you sort of gave them the stiff arm and you pushed them away. Here's my guess is that there's probably somebody in your life that's approaching you, and they're approaching you because your spouse or your kids, or maybe your friends, they've been praying that God would bring somebody into your life. And if you don't have a Nathan, I'll just tell you, or several of them, you want to find a Nathan. You don't want to find yourself in the situation and the circumstances that David was in. Now, here's the thing. You may have no problems right now. There's no challenges. You're not sort of in that place. You're going, I'm not even really experiencing success. None of this is really even a temptation for me. This is the best time to have somebody in your life, I'll just tell you. I remember a few years ago, a gentleman that I really respect, that I'd given some authority in my life to question and ask me anything he wanted. He's experienced tremendous success as a leader. Very wise man. He invited me to go to an event. And I'm now convinced the event was more about the conversation in the car on the way to the event, because it was a ways away. It was about an hour away. We were going to drive to this event. And on the way to the event, he said, hey, I noticed you made some organizational changes. I was like, oh, yeah. And here's what's happening. He said, specifically staffing. You moved some staff around. Tell me about that. And after, I explained the whole situation, he said, well, really what I was asking about is I noticed that you hired a new assistant. And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, she's really attractive. And I said, okay. And it was sort of awkward. And I was like, what are you insinuating? Like, everything inside of me started rising. I'm like, well, don't you trust me? Like, what are you saying? Are you accusing me of something? What's going on? He said, I just bring it up because I don't know if when I was in your position and your age, I don't know if I could have handled that. Like, I'm just curious, like, what kind of boundaries do you have in your life? Like, what are your boundaries in that relationship? And I just wonder, like, what did your wife think about that hire? Like, did you ask her about that? Like, did you ask her when you hired this person? Like, you should have asked her. Like, it probably would have been really good if you asked her. I thought, yeah, that's probably a good idea. I don't think she has a problem with that. I mean, our marriage is going good. Like, we don't really have any problems, but yeah, I probably should have brought her in on that. It was one of the greatest conversations. I went home and told my wife, I was like, you're not gonna believe this. This totally came out of left field. I think this is why he invited me to this event. And the event was great, but like, this is why I was there. And she's like, God, thank you for Dennis. Here's the thing. I don't know where you are, but here's what I know. You value your life. I hope you value your marriage or your family, the things that are most valuable around you. Let me ask you, who has access to help you? Who's your Nathan? Who has access to your marriage and to your finances? Who has access to your social media, to your thought life, to your decisions? Here's why. I'm gonna ask you to trust me. As I look at the story of David, here's what I think. I think if you don't have a Nathan, you might wanna find one before God has to send one to you. Let's pray together. God, I pray today for massive courage for somebody in the room who feels like they've got a lot to lose, and maybe they're on the verge of moving to a place where they're doing things that are out of the norm for them, and they know it. And they're just trying to deal with what's been handed to them, the situation that they're in, whether it's success or failure. and they're battling the challenges that come with each one of those, whether it's the blinding nature of success or the intoxicating nature of success or the challenges of humiliation that come with failure or the disorientation that comes with failure. I just pray that you would give them massive courage to say, you know what, I need somebody who can also have eyes and have a view into my circumstances, that can caution and question me in the decisions and the direction that I'm headed. God, I pray for somebody who you've been stirring in their heart today and they know it. I pray that you would help them to know exactly what to do with what they've heard, and that you would give them the courage to do it. I pray for somebody who's here today and they feel like they've just totally blown it, and they wish they had heard this 2 years ago or 3 years ago or a decade ago. I pray that they would be encouraged today by remembering that you made a promise to David that his kingdom would never end, and you fulfilled that promise. You didn't give up. You didn't walk away from David. Even though he would experience some tremendous consequences, the truth is you still made his name great. And we're today talking about him and his story, and we're talking about a failure, but the reality is his failures pointed us towards you. And I pray that all of our failures would point us towards the need each one of us has for a Savior. And I pray today we would choose to trust you. And we would trust you by inviting the wisdom of others, the view of others, the perspective of others into those places we're tempted to hide and we're tempted to cover up in life. I pray today you would rescue somebody on the front end of what could be a disaster in life because they chose to find a Nathan. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope you guys have a great week. It's awesome. Have a great week. We'll see you next week as we conclude our David series. Have a good week.